Rain lashed against the windowpanes of the little wooden house as Clara tightened the shawl around her shoulders. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from exhaustion. The crops were gone, the roof leaked in 2 places, and the storm warnings had been blaring all afternoon. Yet, she kept praying under her breath, her heart weary but unwilling to break. She'd lost her husband 2 years ago to a mining accident, and ever since then, every sunrise felt like a battle she was barely winning. Her little boy, Tommy, slept in the corner, clutching the old ragged bear that used to be his father's. Clara moved to the door when the wind howled louder, her instincts sharp from years of hardship. Then she heard it, a faint cry, carried by the storm. She paused, pressing her ear to the door. It wasn't an animal. It was human. "Lord, help me," she whispered, pulling on her boots and stepping into the chaos. The wind nearly pushed her back, but she forced her way forward, shielding her face. Branches snapped, debris flew, and the world looked like it was being torn apart. Following the cry, she stumbled down the muddy road until she saw a figure collapsed by a broken fence post. A man. His horse was gone, his coat ripped, and a trickle of blood ran down his temple. Without a second thought, Clara knelt beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" she shouted over the roaring wind. He groaned faintly, eyes fluttering open, dazed and disoriented. "Stay with me," she pleaded, slipping his arm around her shoulders. He was heavy, his tall frame slumping against her, but Clara gritted her teeth and dragged him, step by painful step, back to her cottage. By the time she got him inside, her body was shaking from the effort. She laid him on her old couch and fetched a basin of warm water, tearing a strip from her only good bedsheet to clean his wound. He murmured something incoherent, his voice low and deep. When the storm finally calmed hours later, Clara sat in the corner, watching the man sleep. His face was weathered but strong, his hands rough like someone used to hard work. She wondered who he was and what he was doing out there in the middle of the worst storm the county had seen in years. The next morning, sunlight poured through the cracked window. The man stirred and tried to sit up. "Easy," Clara said softly. "You took a bad hit to the head." He blinked at her, confusion still clouding his gaze. "Where am I?" "My place," she replied. "You were out cold by the old fence line. I brought you in." He looked around, noticing the sparse furnishings, the patched walls, the small boy still asleep by the hearth. You carried me?" he asked, disbelief mixing with embarrassment. "Dragged, mostly," she said with a tired smile. "I've done harder things." He gave a faint chuckle, wincing as he touched his bandaged head. "You shouldn't have risked yourself out there." "I couldn't just leave you," she said simply. "That's not how my mama raised me." Over the next 2 days, she let him rest. She cooked soup from what little she had, mostly potatoes and onions, and he ate quietly, always watching her as though trying to understand her. He never spoke much about himself, only thanked her each time she helped. On the 3rd morning, when he said he was strong enough to leave, Clara gave him her old hat to shield his eyes from the sun. "You'll want to head east," she told him. "That's where the road clears first." He nodded, pausing at the door. "You live here alone?" "Just me and my boy," she said. "Been that way for a while." He seemed to hesitate, his gaze softening. "You're a brave woman," he said. "I owe you my life." "No one owes me anything," Clara replied quietly. "Just, be careful out there." Then he was gone. Days turned into weeks. The storm had wrecked most of the county, and word spread about a stranger who'd been seen riding across the farmlands, offering help, repairing barns, and giving out supplies to the struggling families. Clara paid it little mind, life left her no time for gossip. One hot afternoon, as she hung laundry outside, a horse approached her gate. She froze when she recognized the man from that night, though now, he looked very different. Clean shaven, dressed in a fine coat, boots polished, his horse gleaming with strength. "Ma'am," he said with a smile. "You remember me?" Clara blinked. "Of course. You're the man I found by the fence. I didn't even get your name." He dismounted gracefully, tipping his hat. "Daniel Claiborne," he said. "Owner of Claiborne Ranch." Her heart skipped. Everyone in the county knew that name. The Claibornes owned nearly half the land between Riverbend and Harlow Creek. You own." He nodded, chuckling at her stunned face. "Half the county, they say. But titles don't mean much when a storm knocks you flat in the mud." Clara didn't know what to say. She felt suddenly self-conscious of her worn dress, the peeling paint on the porch, the sagging roof behind her. But Daniel looked at her with quiet respect, not pity. "I came to return the kindness," he said. "You saved me when you didn't have to. Now it's my turn." Before she could protest, he handed her a letter, a deed, she realized, as her eyes scanned the paper. "That's 50 acres of land, west of my ranch," he explained. "Good soil, water access, and a small house already built. It's yours now." Clara's mouth fell open. I can't accept this. I didn't help you for." "I know," he interrupted softly. "That's why you deserve it." Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt her heart lift. Tommy ran out, clutching his bear, curious about the stranger. Daniel knelt and shook his tiny hand, smiling warmly. "I think you'll like your new home," he told the boy. "Plenty of room to run, and a creek full of frogs." Clara couldn't stop crying. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Daniel looked at her with sincerity that silenced her doubts. "Because people like you remind me what matters. You gave when you had nothing. I've had everything and forgot what that meant." He stepped back toward his horse, his hat low against the sunlight. "I'll have the men help you move in the morning," he said. "And if you ever need anything, just send word to Claiborne Ranch." As he rode off down the dusty road, Clara stood there, clutching the deed to her chest. The wind rustled the trees, the air smelled like rain again, but this time, she wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, she felt like the storm had passed for good. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The paper with Daniel Claiborne's signature sat on the small wooden table beside her, weighed down by a half-burned candle. Every few minutes, she'd glance at it, half afraid it would disappear when she blinked. The wind moaned outside, gentle now, not violent like before. She rose quietly, checked on Tommy, and watched him sleep, his little chest rising and falling in peace. Then she looked out the window toward the far hills where Claiborne Ranch must have been, wondering how a stranger could carry so much power yet speak with such humility. For the next few days, she went about her chores, her thoughts consumed by what Daniel had said. Men had promised her things before, promises that vanished with the morning sun. But something about his tone, his steady eyes, made her believe this might be real. On the third morning, before the rooster crowed, she heard horses. She rushed to the window. Sure enough, 3 riders approached her gate, their wagons stacked with wooden crates. They introduced themselves as Mr. Claiborne's men, sent to help her move. By afternoon, her few belongings were loaded: an old table, 2 chairs, a chest of clothes, and a small rocking cradle she'd kept since Tommy's birth. As they rode toward her new land, Clara couldn't stop staring at the countryside. The hills rolled like soft waves, and the scent of earth after rain filled the air. Her heart, which had known only struggle, felt a flicker of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. When they reached the property, Clara gasped. The house wasn't big, but it was new, fresh timber, a porch that didn't sag, and wide fields stretching beyond the fence. A creek shimmered nearby, catching the sunlight like liquid silver. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. One of Daniel's men, an older fellow named Hank, tipped his hat and smiled. "Mr. Claiborne said this place needed a woman's touch. Reckon he was right." Clara smiled shyly, her eyes misting. "Please tell him, thank you. I don't have words." Hank nodded. "He'll be around soon enough. He always checks on what he builds." That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and gold, Clara and Tommy sat on the porch eating stew. It was simple, but it tasted like peace. Tommy laughed for the first time in months, splashing his feet in the creek. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the cool breeze on her face. The next morning, Daniel returned. He came riding slow, his hat low, leading a wagon full of supplies, bags of flour, seed packets, tools, and even a new dress folded neatly on top. "You're making it look like home already," he said with a smile. Clara came down the steps, brushing her hands on her apron. "I don't know how to thank you. This is too much." He shook his head. "It's not charity. It's an investment, in good people." She smiled softly. "You speak like a preacher." He chuckled. "My mama used to say kindness pays its own interest. Guess I finally listened." Over the weeks that followed, Daniel came often. Sometimes to bring supplies, sometimes just to talk. He taught Tommy how to ride a pony from his ranch, and he helped Clara mend the fence when storms blew through. She noticed how he treated his workers, with respect, not arrogance. The men called him boss, but their tone carried warmth, not fear. One evening, after they'd finished fixing a section of fence, Daniel sat on the porch with Clara, both sipping coffee. The air was cool, the sky washed with purple dusk. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked quietly. She looked out toward the fields. "I used to dream about it. When things got bad, I'd imagine starting over somewhere far away. But now, I think this is where I'm meant to stay." He nodded slowly. "Funny. I've got more land than I can see in a day, but I never feel like I belong anywhere." She glanced at him, surprised. "How can you say that? You've got everything." He smiled sadly. "Money builds walls, Clara. Not homes. I spend my days surrounded by people, but most only see what I own, not who I am." Clara studied him then, the quiet in his eyes, the tiredness that came from more than hard work. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong places," she said softly. From that night on, Daniel stayed longer each time he visited. He'd help chop wood, teach Tommy how to fish, or share supper with them. He laughed easily with the boy, and with Clara, he spoke of things no one else knew, his late wife who'd died of fever, the loneliness that haunted him since. Clara listened without judgment. She understood loss. As summer deepened, the land flourished. The garden grew lush, the cornfields rose tall, and the laughter of Tommy filled the air like music. But beneath the peace, Clara's heart began to stir in ways she hadn't felt in years. Every time Daniel rode up the path, her pulse quickened. Every time he smiled, she caught herself smiling back. Yet she pushed those feelings down. He was a ranch owner, a man of means. She was a widow barely finding her footing. Their worlds weren't meant to meet. But fate had its own plans. One stormy night, just before harvest, a knock echoed on the door. Clara opened it to find Daniel standing soaked, his face pale. "Clara," he said breathlessly, "I need your help. One of my men, Hank, got trapped under a fallen beam in the stables. We need hands." Without hesitation, she threw on her coat. "I'll come." They rode through the rain to Claiborne Ranch, where chaos reigned. The storm had torn half the roof off, and men were shouting, struggling to lift the heavy beam. Clara ran to Hank's side, kneeling beside him. His face was white with pain, his leg pinned. "Hold on, Hank," she said firmly. "We'll get you out." She tore her skirt to bind his wound while Daniel and the others heaved with all their might. At last, with one final push, the beam rolled free. Hank groaned in relief, and Clara helped stabilize him as Daniel carried him to safety. When it was over, and the rain softened to a drizzle, Daniel turned to her. His hat was gone, his hair dripping, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "It was dangerous." Clara smiled faintly. "You'd have done the same." He stared at her for a long moment, something unspoken flickering in his gaze. "You're not afraid of anything, are you?" She looked down. "I used to be afraid of everything. Losing, failing, being alone. But when you've already survived the worst, there's not much left to fear." He stepped closer. "You remind me what courage looks like." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Clara didn't look away. From that night on, something changed. Daniel visited even when he didn't have a reason. He'd bring flowers, or sometimes just sit quietly with her on the porch. They talked about the future, about Tommy's schooling, about rebuilding parts of the ranch. The bond between them grew, steady, deep, and wordless. One evening, after the harvest celebration, Daniel found Clara standing by the creek, moonlight shimmering on the water. He approached slowly. "Beautiful night," he said softly. "It is," she murmured, not turning. "Tommy's asleep. He danced himself tired." Daniel smiled. "He's got your spirit." She finally looked at him, the silver light catching the warmth in her eyes. "He's got his father's laugh. You'd have liked him." "I already like his mother," Daniel said quietly. The words hung between them, tender and dangerous. Clara's breath caught. "Don't," she whispered. "You don't have to say things you don't mean." "I mean every word," he said, stepping closer. "Clara, I thought my heart was buried with my wife. I didn't think I could feel again. But then a storm knocked me down, and a woman I'd never met pulled me back into life. You saved more than my body that night, you saved my soul." Tears welled in her eyes. "Daniel, He took her hand, rough and calloused like his own. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Just, don't shut me out. She looked down, then nodded, her hand trembling in his. The weeks that followed were softer than any season Clara could remember. Daniel began including her in ranch matters, asking her opinion, treating her not as charity but as equal. She helped oversee the new school being built for workers' children, and every evening they'd ride the fields together, watching the sunset. The town began to talk, whispers of the widow and the rancher, but neither of them paid much attention. They had both lived through too much loss to care about gossip. Still, Clara feared what others might say to Tommy. One night, she sat with her son by the fire, unsure how to begin. Tommy, she said gently, you like Mr. Claiborne, don't you? The boy grinned. He's my best friend. He says I ride like a real cowboy. Clara smiled. Would it make you happy if he visited more often? Can he live here? Tommy asked innocently. Then you won't be sad when it rains. Clara laughed through her tears and hugged him tight. A month later, Daniel returned from a cattle auction, dust-covered but smiling. He rode up to the porch and dismounted slowly. Clara, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his coat. Her heart pounded. Daniel, what? He opened it, revealing a simple gold ring. I know what you've been through. I know how hard it's been to trust again. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that storms don't just destroy, they reveal what's worth rebuilding. Clara covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. I want to build a life with you, he said. Not out of pity, not because I owe you, but because I can't imagine a day without your Tommy. You're the only part of my world that feels like home. For a long moment, silence filled the space between them, broken only by the chirping crickets. Then Clara nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Daniel. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking as much as hers. Tommy came running from inside, laughing when he saw them. Daniel scooped him up, spinning him around, his laughter echoing across the fields. The wedding was small, held by the creek where they first talked under the moonlight. The townsfolk came, smiling and whispering blessings. For once, Clara didn't care what anyone thought. She wore a pale blue dress Daniel's sister had sent from the city, and he stood tall beside her in his best coat. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Daniel kissed her gently, sealing years of pain with a promise of peace. Life on the ranch changed after that. Clara managed the household with quiet grace, and the workers adored her for her kindness. Tommy grew strong, learning to ride and read under Daniel's guidance. Together, they rebuilt what storms had broken, both the land and their hearts. And every time Clara walked through those fields, she remembered that night when the wind roared and she followed a stranger's cry into the darkness. She had thought she was saving a man from the storm. But in truth, that night, she had saved herself too.